Hello folks, Tuhon Bill McGrath here, Pekiti-Tirsia International. Mike Resch of Luxembourg runs a PTI club there and asked me to answer some questions about Pekiti-Tirsia, my history and with it and things like that. So here we are. I grew up in New York and started Pekiti-Tirsia in 1975. I was 14 years old. My teacher, Grandmaster Leo Gahe, had left the Philippines in 1973 when Ferdinand Marcos, the president at the time, declared martial law in the Philippines. He and his family moved to New York, and within a few months we were right around the corner from my house. I could not afford to train with him then. He was teaching 2 nights a week out of his garage and charging a whole $2 a week or a class, I forget. Couldn't afford it till I was 14, a couple years later, and got a paper route delivering newspapers. And by that time inflation had set in. He had gone up to a whole $2.50 a class, but I could afford it by then and started training with him. So that's my history to start. Let's get to Mike's questions. Are there people in martial arts who inspired you? Yes, probably big 3. Obviously Tuhon Gahe, was my first and main teacher for many, many years. In 1979, he introduced us to an Indonesian Pencak Silat instructor named Suryadi Jaffrey. We used to call him Eddie. And he was a really interesting guy. Pencak Silat is an amazing martial art. A lot of varieties. That's a general term. He taught us 5 different styles of Silat. Really unusual technique. Leo used to call it out-of-this-world technique. Like it wasn't from Earth, from another planet. And the other big inspiration, although I never really trained under him, and I've seen him do so much down through the years, is Guru Danana Santo. He is not only one of the best martial artists on the planet, probably one of the nicest human beings on the planet. And he inspires me to try and be not only a good martial artist, but be a decent human being. So next question. Well, how and when did you discover Kali? I should say Kali is a general term for Philippine martial arts. And there's even a bit of controversy like in that name. My teacher's family art is called Pekiti-Tirsia. Pekiti means close, Tirsia means thirds. Like we would say close quarters in the West. They say close thirds. But the general names for Philippine martial arts in the Visayas Central Region and North Luzon in the Philippines are Eskrima and Arnis, or Arnis de Mano. And that's kind of like saying Kung Fu or Karate. That's a general term. And then saying Pekiti-Tirsia or Doce Paris or the other individual styles are individual names, like saying Wing Chun or Shotokan, things like that. Kali is reputedly the older term, but you have to remember the Philippines is like, 700 islands with their own dialects. My teacher told me he had read a book in the 50s that was a history of Philippine martial arts, and the term they used there, as the Spanish were going around the different islands, they heard the word Kali used for a general term for fighting. So he took that as my teacher took that as the original name for Philippine martial arts. And a lot of Filipino instructors these days, if they don't want to use a Spanish-based term like Eskrima or Arnis, will use Kali. but there probably was not one single original term throughout all the Philippines, because there are different languages throughout the Philippines. What makes Pekiti-Tirsia special from your point of view? The way Leo taught the history of Pekiti-Tirsia, there was a central art taught by his great-grandfather. Pekiti-Tirsia started in 1897, according to Leo. And 1897 was the time of the rebellion against Spain by the Filipinos. So you'll see a lot of similarities in base core drills. One theory is they had a lot of cross training at that time, so that's why you see commonalities. Another theory is, and one that's making a lot more sense to me as time goes on, is the Spanish never had enough men in the Philippines to really conquer the islands. So what they did was go to a chief of an individual island and say, hey, we're going to go and take over that island there. Why don't you give us some of your men? We'll take over your enemy island, because all islands were enemies with each other back then. We'll take it over. We'll install your men, as being in charge of the port city. And as we take out our percentage of the harvest every year, your men will be in charge of that, tax collection, whatever, and they will give us a percentage. Your men will be the actual troops controlling the port city. Our men will be the Spanish, will be the officers. And they would kind of hip-hop, or not hip-hop, jump from island to island and island. Hopscotch is the term I'm thinking of. They would jump from island to island, going to island A, we're going to take over island B, you come with us, yeah. Then they go to island B, hey, we're going to take over island C, you send your men, yeah. And they'd jump around that way. But what makes Pekiti-Tirsia special is Leo said his grandfather, Conrado Tortal, and the grandfather's brothers, once they learned a base art from their father, went to, during the lull between planting and harvest, would go from island to island, training with other people, sparring other people, get an idea of other parts of Philippine martial arts in the Visayan region, come back, and they would say, put it in the laboratory. So something very unusual compared to other Asian martial arts. They weren't trying to preserve their father's martial art. Leo said they were trying to destroy their father's martial art. They'd come and they'd take technique A and say, okay, we got 5 different things from other arts, let's see, put it against technique A and see if that works or not. Whichever one worked, it was the father's technique or something else, they would put that as, okay, that's the official technique to solve that problem. That problem may be, defending against a basic forehand cut, let's say. And Pekiti-Tirsia has a wide range of technique. There are over 500 techniques in the single stick sword category, 144 in double stick or double sword, another 144 in sword and dagger, a whole bunch in knife, probably 144, and then a whole bunch of empty hand technique, because a lot of it is based on the empty hand versus knife technique, and it's just a large volume of technique that all seems to work, because it's based on root principles, and it's simply translated from weapon to weapon. What you're going to do with a sword is not going to be the same thing you're going to do with a fist, let's say. But a lot of the gross motion where the force is generated from may be similar. And obviously, what you're going to do with a single sword can be done with a double sword for that hand. So that's what makes Pekiti-Tirsia special. Simply the volume of the technique and how interconnected it is and how well connected it is. The last few years I've been recommending a book to understand the mindset of the Western Europeans who came into the Philippines. And this book is by the author C.S. Lewis, who, wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, things like that. But his main job was as a professor of literature at one of the big colleges in England, I forget which one. But he wrote a book called The Discarded Image, an introduction to medieval and Renaissance literature. And that goes into the mindset of people at that time period in Europe. And one of the things that impressed me was the intricacy and the complexity that they really seem to have high regard for. And if you look at Philippine martial arts, especially Pekiti-Tirsia, you can really see a lot of that mindset. So I recommend that book to understand not only the Europeans came to the Philippines at a very particular time. It's not just Spanish influence with some Italian instructors as well, as what I've heard. Not only Western European thought on the influence of Philippine martial arts, but thought at a very specific time, the Renaissance era, is when the Spanish first got to the Philippines. And I really think that's crucial in understanding a lot of the Spanish influence on Philippine martial arts. And I'll put a link, or I'll send a link to Mike so you could see that book if you want. C.S. Lewis, The Discarded Image. The church has very own patterns, approaches. Do you think people can express themselves through Kali? Yes, and there's no way of avoiding that. We had a small group of advanced guys training under Grandmaster Guy at the same time, all training together, sparring together, and they really teach and emphasize different things in their own teaching. So you can have two different people learning, twin brothers learning under the same teacher at the same time are probably going to teach things or emphasize things a little differently, depending on physical and mental attributes. Obviously, twin brothers probably not going to have that many physical attributes differently, could have mental attributes. Timing, aggressiveness, what type of weapon category you like. This is all going to get expressed differently. So yeah, you're going to have people express themselves, whether you intend it or not, differently in a martial art, because human beings are different. For beginners, what do you consider important? Any hints? I would say work a lot on footwork. Work a lot on working the footwork with basics. So when people ask me that similar question, what do I start with in PTI? I say, get the basic footwork tape, a video, we don't use tapes anymore, get the 5-attack subsystem, and work your basic single stick technique with the footwork, basic footwork you see there. You'll see many, many, many masters of all different martial arts, when they practice by themselves on their own time, they're not teaching in class, what do they practice? They practice the basics. You don't have to go fast. I'd recommend actually going slowly. A nice, even cruising speed, whichever the slowest, comfortable speed you can go, or I should say, just a comfortable speed you can do the technique accurately. Practice that. You'll do very well if you practice that 2 or 3 days a week. Just practice the basics with footwork. People ask me, is Pekiti-Tirsia an internal art or an external art? And then these days ask me, is it a combat art or a sport art? What I've been answering them is, Pekiti-Tirsia is a footwork and timing art. The footwork is a tool to teach you correct distance management and it's really all towards the goal of getting good timing. And that timing in a fight is what differentiates the master from the beginner. How good is your timing? What would you say to the beginner who may feel overwhelmed by the hugeness of the system? It's something like what Bruce Lee said: when I started, a punch was just a punch, kick was just a kick. Then I got into the art, and I saw these techniques, and I got overwhelmed, and now I've been doing the technique a long time, and a punch is just a punch, a kick is just a kick. Leo would say everything is just forehand and backhand. There's a lot of different ways to do a forehand and a backhand, but generally the muscles involved, it's just a forehand and just a backhand. A lot of the technique you're learning is how to solve different problems, and a lot of the advanced material is how to recognize what problem do you need to solve. This is how I use a hammer. This is how I use a saw. This is how I use a crowbar. Then a lot of the advanced technique is say, okay, there's a problem. Is that problem a nail? Then I pick up a hammer. Is that problem a screw that I got to put into a wall? Then I pick up a screwdriver. Is that problem a nail I have to get out of a wall? Then I might get the crowbar to pull it out of the wall. What size nail is it? What size hammer do I use? So that's the large amount of technique is simply that you have a lot of different size hammers. But it's still, you should realize that a nail is a nail and a hammer is a hammer. And what is the difference between a nail and a screw? So that's why the toolbox is so big, but really category of tools, there's not that many category of tools. And a lot of it is just forehand strike, backhand strike, and then a thrust. So it's not that big once you get through it. Practice your basics and you won't get overwhelmed. When it comes to the church, you have a favorite topic. I kind of have a favorite teaching topic these days. I've been doing a lot of learning through comparisons in my classes. So what I do, or my seminars, I don't have a formal school right now. And I'll say, okay, here's 4 ways to counter a straight punch, a lead straight punch, let's say. I can go here's a technique to move to my right, a technique to move to my left, a technique to use if the guy is bigger than me and stronger, a technique to use if the guy is smaller than me or faster. And then I will have people partner up in groups of 3. So 2 bad guys and 1 good guy. So let's say guy attacks you to your right and with a left lead. And so my natural thing, and the first thing you learn, most basic, is to move to my right and get outside his attack, right, on the left lead punch, the left jab. Which is well and good. But what happens if, let's say, the guy on my left attacks first with a left jab? Then my going to my right means I'm going towards the opponent on my right, the bad guy number 2 in this case. So then going to the basic, going to my right, the outside natural move may not be the correct move. Maybe I should go to my left to escape bad guy number 2. Then I have to say, okay, is the guy bigger than me or smaller than me? And I use examples of, if I'm Mike Tyson fighting Muhammad Ali, then maybe I don't want to punch the head. Maybe I want to go under and go for the ribs with a body shot. However, if I'm Muhammad Ali fighting Mike Tyson, I don't want to get close to the guy. I want to stay at range and use my faster jab to go for his head. So these days my emphasis is on learning through comparisons. Not only what to do, how to do a technique, but when to use that specific technique. And that's been my emphasis in the last few years, once I get people over the hump of the basics. Any personal points of view about martial arts you want to share with us, inspirations, final thoughts? Be a well-rounded individual. Martial arts should be your servant. You should not be the servant of the martial arts. Don't become a cult. Protect your family. Martial arts should be there to give you good health, help you protect your family. It's a fun thing to do. You're not a member of a cult that worships that particular martial art. Don't worship your martial art instructor. You should all be friends moving towards the same goal, making you a better person, physically, mentally, and have a good time while doing it. It's, it should be fun, and it should be good for your health, both mentally and physically. So keep that goal in mind as you practice martial arts. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mike, for sending these questions. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.